we're so glad to have everybody here at our weekly masterclass here to Mind for All Seasons. And we're excited that Dr. Ryan Williamson is with us. He is a board certified neurologist. He's a Navy veteran. He's the founder of Transcend Health, which is a platform that sort of blends neuroscience with high performance living. He got a medical degree at Florida State University. He completed his neurology training at Georgetown University Hospital. He then went on to serve as lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. And today he helps people get over brain fog and improve their memory and optimize their cognitive performance for a longer and healthier and more impactful life. And in his work at Transcend Health, he offers expert driven protocols and educational memberships and private coaching. And most excitingly, at least for me, because I'm such a bibliophile, he just published a book called The Incredible Brain. I've read it personally. In fact, I read it, most of it I read, Dr. Williamson, while I was on my spin bike taking exercise snacks between things at work. And I was just scrolling through reading it. So it was very validating to read all about your take on exercise while on the bike. So loved that. And I'm just excited for everybody to hear some of the nuggets that you dropped in that book, to get your take on things. I think it'll be really validating in a lot of ways for the work that our members here at Mind for All Seasons are doing to optimize their brain health. So I know you've got some things that you can present and share with us. You're certainly welcome to share your screen if you have any slides that you want to share. And then you and I can bounce back and forth with some questions, and we'll open it up for a general Q&A toward the end of it. So I'll hand it off to your capable hands, and we're excited to learn from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Eric, for the warm introduction. And again, it's just a pleasure to be with you all today. So thank you for taking the time to have me. And I got into this field, into functional medicine, the longevity space, whatever we want to call this, through really a great deal of personal tragedy. And that's probably not the way that you'd want to hear, or a happy day, or start your call, but it's this is really reflective of a lifetime and a career in medicine of watching people suffer needlessly from preventable chronic disease. And along those lines, a number that really stands out to me is from an NHANES study, and that's that 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy.
Mm.
And that basically means that not some of us, not most of us, but darn near all of us do not have optimal levels of blood pressure, of cholesterol, of triglycerides or fats in our bloodstream, of blood glucose, or an abdominal circumference that's ideal. And you might think, well, why do we care about those things? And Eric and I were just chatting before the call about a friend of his that had some lab parameters that were off and supplements. And these aren't just numbers that doctors like to look at, or make you feel shameful about if they're not in order. But it has more to do with what these conditions and what these parameters lead to or set us up for later in life. Namely, these chronic conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, insulin resistance, high cholesterol or hyperlipidemia, and then what those lead to in terms of heart attacks, strokes, dementia, and really just a shortened health span, which is how long we live well, and a shortened lifespan, or how long we live, which is, I think, something we're all familiar with. And again, with that sad opening, I'm going to pivot and say there's hope, and that's really why I'm here, is to discuss what do we do about that. And I guess another anecdotal story to sort of drive this home about the 93%. I was actually talking to my dad yesterday. He was at an event with the University of South Florida athletics coaches, and he texted me and said, I can't believe how many of the coaches are overweight or obese. And I said, Dad, I mean, 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. So statistically, this applies. And he said, well, but yeah, these are people that are coaching athletes, and they're active. And wouldn't you think that this doesn't apply to them? And I said, no, I mean, think about the life of a coach, and even how this translates to the life of an average person. What does a coach do? Well, they travel a lot. And so maybe they're not getting consistent rest, or their sleep is probably off. They're really worried about performance, and so there's a lot of pressure to do well and to perform and win games. Their nutrition plan's probably pretty horrible because I don't know, unless they've got a traveling chef or something that helps them along with this. There's an overabundance of food, and it's probably not the right stuff to eat anyway. And last, I mean, we're just as a general society, we are not as active as we all should be. And here I am sitting in a chair talking to you guys. So I mean, this is just what we've come to expect. But I paint that picture because modern society and our social evolution and our modern world has rapidly outpaced our biological evolution and our design. And these two worlds that we live in, or at least these two paradigms, are very incongruent. And so if we go back, I mean, this doesn't, not even just, really more than a few decades, but a couple hundred years, or even a couple of thousand years, and we look at, what did our ancestors do? Well, they did some very basic things that we don't really do much of anymore. And again, that was wake up with the sun before there was artificial lights and electricity. They moved a lot. They probably woke up feeling hungry and maybe went hours without eating. And when it was time to actually go eat, they couldn't just go reach in the pantry or get DoorDash or run to Costco, right? They had to go find food. And so this would involve walking to go maybe find a handful of organic blueberries or maybe some small game, all of which kind of fit in the Whole Foods camp, right? Not Whole Foods the company, but actual whole foods from the earth. And again, maybe they didn't find anything at all, and they went to bed hungry. But in general, there weren't a lot of chronic stressors, meaning they weren't worried about what their boss wanted or quarterly returns or their email list or inbox, right? So they weren't really too bothered or stressed out. And at the end of the day, they got back together in groups and tribes, much like a Mind for All Seasons, and being able to band together and share ideas. And when the sun went down, they got sleepy and they went to bed and they did it all over again. And the reason I paint this picture in these two kind of diverging worlds is that we're thrown into the modern world, and that just simply does not respect our biology and it does not respect our design. Is everyone tracking that? Show of hands. Okay, all right, gotcha. Wonderful. So thank you, Carol. That paradigm sets us up for how do we tackle this, or what do we do about this? And this is a lot of what you all do at A Mind for All Seasons, and it really comes down to these principles regarding how our bodies and how our brains are designed to work and how they optimally function. And I think one of the neatest things about this, about when we put all these this lifestyle design in place, at least all these things in place, what improves our performance and what improves how we feel and how we show up and our ability to think more clearly and get rid of this brain fog, cognitive fatigue. Most of these things also actually help with our longevity too, and with that health span and that lifespan. So it's a nice two for one, which is pretty cool. And I think where at least a lot of people that I've listened to in the space or that I've talked to, where they may miss the mark a little bit, it's that they overcomplicate things. And I try to make things as simple as I can. Although as a neurologist, I have never been accused of being short-winded. So I by nature often overcomplicate things. So I try to think, how can I break this down and make this as simple as I can for people? And through the last couple of years of talking with patients and clients, and even after getting the book out, I've come up with what I call my brain protocol. And brain, BRAIN, is an acronym for all of these fundamental lifestyle pillars that we know actually move the needle when it comes to our health. And another statistic that I always like to share is that somewhere between 70 and 90% of all of our health outcomes are in fact lifestyle based, meaning that what we do every single day matters. And this is not just due to random luck or chance or genetics or what have you. I mean, rarely, yes, these things are we have to be mindful of, and there are ways we can optimize and test for certain risks or diseases, but for the most part, I mean, it really comes down to these five key pillars, and these are the pillars of brain and the brain protocol. And if you guys are up for it, I'd like to spend at least a few minutes on that, and then maybe Eric and I can jump into some Q&A and we can dissect that further or answer your questions. Is that thumbs up or nod of heads? Okay, I'm good.
Yep,
Randy,
let's
thanks.
go
Yep.
to it.
Here, let's do it. Okay. So brain, BRAIN. So I start with letter B, and that stands for breath work. And for those that are unfamiliar, breath work is controlling our breathing and the voluntary portion of breathing, because breathing is one of these interesting things that till you draw your attention to it, it's under automatic control or autonomic nervous system control. We don't really think about it a whole lot. But when we actually take the time, and this literally we're talking 5 or 10 minutes a day, we actually take the time to regulate our breathing. This actually regulates our nervous system. And not only that, it helps lower our blood pressure, helps lower our heart rate. But over time, when we are intentional about this and when we do this, we now know that this actually strengthens the connections in our prefrontal cortex, which is the responsible for our highest and best thinking and our judgment and our ability to enact our vision. So not our actual literal vision where we see, but our long-term vision metaphorically. And it gets us out of that fight or flight or freeze, that stress, sympathetic state, that fear mode. And not only does it get us feeling better and performing well in the moment, but this actually rewires our brain to perform better long into the future. So it's an investment that pays off not just today, but the more we do it, and actually becomes more likely that we end up in that state from here forward. So breath work, mindfulness, meditation, everything in this realm actually really helps with this tremendously. So that's letter B. Letter R is for rest. And when I talk about rest, back to our ancestors, as I said, when the sun went down, they slept well and they got regular quality sleep. This is just another fact of our biology. But we all need somewhere between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep. And everybody's generally got a sense of where they are on that spectrum and whether you like to go to sleep earlier or maybe stay up a little later. That is genetic, I suppose. That's called our chronotype. So respecting that as well as we can is quite helpful. But in either case, I mean, in my world, I mean, in medicine, my gosh, we were subjected to 24-hour calls and, night shifts and shift changes. And we now know that this is massively intrusive to our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is this natural 24-hour cycle that governs many of the processes in our body. And our circadian rhythm responds to internal and external cues. And the external cues we can very much control, such as when do we expose ourselves to light earlier in the day versus later in the evenings? When do we choose to exercise or be active or move? When do we choose to eat and what meals do we consume and in how much, what quantity? All of these things matter with respect to that natural curve. And the more that we can mimic that natural biology, the more that our body stays happy, is the simplest way I can put that. And ensuring that we achieve quality rest as part of this and are getting that regular sleep. Again, this ensures that our bodies are repairing themselves and our memories are forming and our muscles heal after exercise. Sleep is the only time that our brain sort of washing machine is turned on, where we clear out toxic metabolites and proteins that accumulate throughout the day that we know over time can increase our risk of developing dementia down the road. So if we're not sleeping well, that's another risk there. So R for rest is very important. Again, we can dissect more of that here in a minute. Moving on to letter A, that's for activity. And when I say activity, that, like I said, we are unnecessarily sedentary, and most of us could absolutely move more. And when I say move more, I'm not talking about taking up amateur bodybuilding or becoming a power lifter if you're not a weightlifter. This is not something that you need to go head to the gym for if that's not your thing. But even something as simple as exercise snacks that Eric was mentioning earlier while he was reading The Incredible Brain a few weeks ago, just 6 minutes a day, folks. I mean, we know that if you hit 2 minutes 3 times a day, especially if it's around meals, this can have up to a 40% reduction in what's called all-cause mortality, which is your risk of dying of anything. And for 6 minutes a day, that's pretty darn powerful. And this is something as simple as like some jumping jacks or high knees in place, maybe air squats or push-ups, if you're able to do those, or even push-ups on your knees, something like this. So just thinking about where and how to integrate movement and making that a regular part of our day, massively powerful. And then if we dial that up to, our 8 to 10,000 steps a day, which can be had by going for a walk outside. Donovan, I don't know the temperature, but it looks like a nice, pretty blue sky where you are. So if walking's an option, that's always great.
Yeah.
So you got
Awesome.
something?
Oh, yeah, you're right. You can go on walks here all the time, and even when it's raining, which is rare, but it's still fun to go. So no excuse not to get moving.
That's exactly right. And even up here in Billings, Montana, where it's in the 20s, I try to work in my cold exposure as part of my hormesis when I'm here. So, I intentionally get myself in a slightly uncomfortable environment, but still make an intentional effort to move. But again, that 8 to 10,000 steps really seems to be a sweet spot that again we can hit through if you've got just a home under desk treadmill that you can put on at a standing desk, or if you can just go outside if you live in a climate that's nice enough to do that. And then again, if we can get into dedicated cardiovascular activity and strength training or resistance training and high intensity interval training, so we can build that ladder up as we get the baseline. But again, activity is paramount. And if I could pick one, again, intervention or if there's a longevity pill or drug, I think exercise is it in terms of all the systems that it turns on and helps keep our brains and our bodies young. So that's A for activity. When we look at I, that's for intake. So I in brain is intake, and that is all things nutrition and supplement related. This one's fairly nuanced in terms of what works well for different people because we all have different dietary preferences and needs, potentially allergies to consider, religious beliefs, so on and so forth. But I find that there are more, how to put this politely, dietary camps than perhaps people that follow evidence-based protocols. So not to throw shade at anybody that's done one camp or another, but when we look at the medical evidence, something like a Mediterranean or a plant-based diet seems to have the highest evidence that helps keep our brain and our body healthy. And what doesn't get talked about as much is not only that, but actually being mindful of our total caloric balance. So this actually fits in with letter A for activity. So A and I are close together, activity intake, because we've got to have the right balance of calories. And as I mentioned in chatting with my dad yesterday about the event where he was with the coaches, that they were all overweight, and most Americans are metabolically unhealthy and overweight. This is no one's fault. I mean, I want to be clear about that. It's just the circumstance we find ourselves in. And if we do not learn to be intentional about moving enough and controlling the appropriate level of calories relative to our needs, we end up with all of these metabolic issues that, again, we know are like gasoline on the fire for chronic disease and for premature issues that are largely avoidable. So, playing with things like intermittent fasting, if that's tolerable for some people, or just learning how to control calories through an app, or using a dietitian or something like this. These are all helpful interventions that can keep that balance in check. And then last letter in the brain protocol is letter N, and that stands for nurturing. And when I say nurturing, I mean all things community, relationships, accountability, and support. And in fact, this is not just anecdotal or woo or pseudoscience. When we look at the data, people that are well supported, that have healthy relationships, that again band together in tribes, such as what you all have here and what I have in my trans and health community, people just do better. They're happier, they're more optimistic, they're more positive. They tend to cultivate a higher sense of purpose and gratitude. They live longer, they go out and do more in the world, and it becomes easier to integrate all the letters of brain and everything else that we want to go do. And that's really, I think, why you all are here and why you all join a community like this. It's not to listen to nerds like me drone on about the brain and get excited about all the science. It's it's because you are investing in learning how to show up more for what you want to do in life, right? That's why we're all here. So we can actually be our highest and best selves and do what matters and find our purpose and our why. And that's to me, that's what it's all about anyway. And I think that's probably likely the case if I were to interview each of you. So that's kind of my soapbox. That's my baseline opening spiel. And again, Eric, we can run in any direction you want. What can I do?
Yeah, thank you so much for the framework. We've often talked to our members about a kind of similar framework, BEDDSS, brain training, exercise, diet, dental health, sleep, and stress management. So there's a lot of overlap in the kinds of things that we frequently talk about. But I love the emphasis on really foundational understanding of human systems. But a few questions come to mind. One thing that you mentioned almost in passing when you were talking about getting outside in Billings, Montana on a cold morning is part of your hormesis approach. And some of us know what hormesis is, but maybe not everybody on the call understands the principle of hormesis. And I wonder if you could explain that and how to leverage that.
Absolutely. So apologies if I skipped over that. I do try my best to not just splurge out a bunch of medical jargon because I think that's very ineffective. Eric and I were talking the other day about how important communication is. And I've tried my best in the incredible brain and with what I do on calls like this and everybody to try to put things in English, so to speak. So apologies if I missed that. But hormesis comes from a Greek term that basically encompasses the idea that if we stress our bodies in the right way, we can turn on genes and pathways that can actually help our cells and our body's machinery repair itself. And there are really a handful of categories here that apply. Exercise, believe it or not, is probably the most common hormetic stressor that we're all familiar with. It just maybe doesn't get categorized that way, but it's a stressor that excuse me, a stressor that in the right dose is helpful, but too far the other direction can actually be harmful. So it's kind of finding this right balance. And in fact, if anyone is familiar with the ancient Greek history of the marathon, I'm going to probably butcher this. So if there are any historians, please help me out here. But I can't remember the gentleman's name that ran from, was it Athens to Marathon to deliver news of an invading, I don't know if it was Persia or whatever, but the guy dropped dead at the end of 26.2 miles, right? At least that's the punchline. Anybody have the history of his name? Because I'm totally blanking on this.
I know the story, but I can't help you with the name.
All right. Well, the point of this story is that too much exercise can be harmful. So overdoing it certainly is not what we want. Predisposes to injury and worst cases death, like the poor gentleman that ran from Athens to Marathon. But in either case, exercise is a hormetic stressor. And then we get into other types, such as dedicated hot or cold exposure. So something you all may talk about here, have heard of, would be so intentional heat exposure like saunas, for example. And there's some, I think, in my opinion, great data out of Finland, where saunas have been part of their culture for goodness, hundreds of years, where we look at the positive impact this has on our cardiovascular disease risk and even cerebrovascular stroke risk. So lowering our chance that we would end up with a heart attack or a stroke. Even some data that it seems neuroprotective, so lowering our risk of dementia, not to mention helping with the health of blood vessels and our mood for that matter. So very powerful intervention, but again, can be potentially dangerous if we're in a hot environment for too long. And then the other category, again, hence my joke about being outside in cold Montana, would be dedicated cold exposure. Now, when we look at the literature, again, at least in my opinion, I think the data aren't as compelling as heat exposure in terms of global benefit. But one thing cold exposure seems to do, which I find quite fascinating, is that it upregulates or increases a population of a specific type of fat in the body called brown fat. And brown fat is named that way because when we look at it under a microscope, it looks brown, not white, which is kind of the classic fat that we're familiar with, the more the energy storage type of fat. But the reason brown fat is brown is that it's got a lot of what are called mitochondria. And if anyone remembers from high school biology, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, that's where we burn most of our energy. And if we have more of those, believe it or not, we can actually increase our body's basal metabolic rate. So we all wake up, and before we move the first finger or go outside to walk, it takes quite a bit of energy just to keep the lights on, so to speak. And when we elevate that resting metabolic rate by burning more mitochondria in this brown fat, which is under our collarbones and even our shoulder blades, is a lot where this collects in response to cold temperature. That the idea from an evolutionary perspective is that when it's cold, you got to generate more heat. And so when you're intentionally exposing yourself to cold, that brown fat population increases. That helps burn more energy. But as a byproduct of that, back to that caloric balance, right? The calories in, calories out equation, that actually helps burn more energy even at rest, which is really interesting. And that can help maintain more normal levels of blood sugar over time, which is also correlated with an improved lifespan and improved health span and just lower rates of dementia and so forth. So cold exposure can be a neat one from a hormetic, kind of dose response. But again, too much cold, we can end up with hypothermia and nobody needs that. And of course, too much cold can be lethal. So got to have that right balance. And then I guess the last category would be what are called phytochemicals. So this is more of a dietary thing, but there are chemical stressors that exist in a wide array of plants and fruits. So the way I like to think about this is sort of eating the rainbow, so to speak, if this is again in line with your dietary preferences. But carrots and red onions, leafy greens all have different chemical phytochemicals that actually can, on a cellular level, sort of stress our cells into repairing themselves, which is pretty cool. So sort of a natural or plant-based medicine almost, just by following again that sort of plant-based or Mediterranean style diet with a nice variety. So hopefully that wasn't too deep of a dive, but Eric, did that answer the hormesis question?
Yeah, yeah. I'd sum up what I'm hearing you say is basically a stressor, a modest stressor that induces the body to become more resilient. And it overcomes one of the challenges that people face. I've seen evidence that if you're not regularly exposed to hormetic stressors, that a lot of people can lose up to half their mitochondria by the time they hit midlife, and that number just keeps going down. And hormesis is really the one thing that stimulates the body to produce more and bigger and healthier mitochondria. And I would just ask you about two other potential hormetic stressors. Do you agree that modest exposure to UV light and other wavelengths in sunlight, as well as hypoxia, modest hypoxia, would be hormetic stressors to consider? So get out and get some sunshine, maybe do some breath work that includes some breath holding exercises. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm more familiar with the data on hypoxia as a positive hormetic stressor specifically. And I am also a big fan of light exposure earlier in the day with respect to that circadian rhythm. I guess I'm less aware of the UV light in particular, because at least in my mind, UV light potentially damages DNA and can cause, oh gosh, what are they called? Base, where your base is irreversibly bond. I'm blanking on the term, although I guess it doesn't matter. But it can predispose to skin cancer and other things if we're overexposed to UV light. Which again, back to your point about being hormetic, if it's the right dose, perhaps that's helpful, not harmful. But to harp on light or sunlight for just a minute. If we achieve or at least receive full spectrum light in our eyes within about the first hour of awakening, this is one of those external cues that we can use to actually prime that circadian rhythm because our brain is again uniquely responsive to light. And just a quick walk through the pathway, light gets in through the eyes and that gets beamed to a little part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is right in the middle. And that's where that circadian pacemaker lives. And so early light, at least in the first, again, hour or so of the day, helps prime our brain and our body to be awake, to be alert, to make sure that our cortisol levels are responding as they should, our blood pressure, our digestive health, our activity, all of it. And equally importantly, again, when it's time to go to bed or when it's time to sleep later in the day, as that circadian rhythm starts to enter the kind of the lower phase where we get sleepy, which there's some other mechanisms responsible there. I'll skip that with adenosine for those who are familiar with sort of caffeine as an adenosine receptor modifier. But we want to try to avoid light too late in the day because if we stare at a screen, like the computers that we're all on, or if you're watching on your phone or a tablet or something like that, which is again just back to that modern society that we're sort of stuck in, right? We're staring at screens all day. If we do that too late, that can actually delay the release of melatonin. And melatonin is one of the neurotransmitters that helps us fall asleep once in the absence of light. But it's uniquely responsive to again darkness. So light can't be present. So again, Eric, I guess I don't know if the UV on the hormetic side is something I'm qualified to answer, but certainly important in the early part of the day to help keep that circadian rhythm where it needs to be.
Yeah, totally agree about circadian syncing and affecting those melanopsin receptors in the eye.
Yes.
I think that's critical. The idea with UV exposure modestly, not at a damaging level, is just you're going to stimulate a little bit of oxidative stress, which will stimulate an upregulation of antioxidant pathways.
You give me
Now
some reading and some homework then.
yeah, there's a lot of good questions that people have been putting in the chat.
Okay.
And I want to ask you one other question that comes directly from the fact that I've read The Optimal Brain, or excuse me, The Incredible Brain. We've been
Yes.
talking about optimizing. So Dr. Williamson's book, The Incredible Brain, it's available on all the major platforms. But you said something in that book that I don't want to run the risk of skipping over and not talking about. It was one of the things in the book that as a guy that's in this space all the time and reading heavily in this space, it stood out because I've never heard anyone else use this term. And maybe I just haven't read broadly enough to see it. I don't know. But you talked in the book about techno stress. And that caught my attention because I was like, okay, I think I know what that is, but let's get the explanation here. So, for all of our members and those who will watch this on the replay, can you give us a kind of a short definition of techno stress and how to tell if we're really affected by it? And I don't want to take too much time because we've got so many great questions to get to, but walk us through techno stress.
So the short answer is we are all impacted by techno stress on some level, and and the general idea, again, back to this modern societal problem, the sort of problem I try to frame or paint, when we look at our intimate relationship with all things technological. So again, computers, tablets, phones, as I said, email, TVs, AirPods. I mean, all of it. I mean, we are so dependent on technology as a society that our brains have to ingest, process, and filter I mean, more information in the course of a day than your ancestors may have dealt with all year, or perhaps more. I mean, it is abundantly overwhelming. And when you just think about the alert fatigue that we all have, how many times a day your phone rings from a telemarketer, or you get a text message or a WhatsApp if you talk to people overseas. I mean, I can go on and on with examples, but the idea is that we've just got so much information constantly competing for our attention that this is not in line with how our brains work. That's the easiest way I can put it. And we can go through the ultradian rhythm and working memory is kind of an example of the biology, if you'd like, Eric. But in short order, we have got to learn to push away from and set boundaries with technology to help lower that burden. And I think you will all find that you will perform better and be more optimized, as it were, if we do so.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a big believer that whatever the stressor is, when stress is going up, we have an opportunity to intentionally counterbalance. And I don't think I've paid enough attention to ways that techno stress specifically might be affecting me and to consider what exactly am I doing to counterbalance that and assess that. So thank you. I think that's a really good and needed point. Um, Now, if you have a question, let's just keep dumping them in the chat because we're getting a great list of questions, and we will pound through as many of these as we can. So we'll try to be succinct here. But um, Randy says, though a loaded question, what would be your Fab Five supplements to optimize brain health? These would be supplements you would recommend to most clients who want to be neuroprotective. So obviously there are a lot of things we've been talking about that you can't medicate or supplement your way out of, but if you were to pick a list of about five things, what would that look like for you?
Sure. Great question, Randy. Thanks. So creatine monohydrate is perhaps one of
Mhm.
my favorites, and I'm seeing a lot of head nods. So maybe it's something you all cover here. The kind of the classic dose for muscle building and athletic performance for decades has been on the order of about 5 grams a day. It is weight based, so it varies a little bit from individual to individual. But we now know that creatine can cross the blood-brain barrier via the creatine transporter, and we've got to get a higher dose to be able to do that. So it seems so closer to probably 10 grams a day, I think is ideal based on my read of the literature. Again, weight based. And though I don't have as much compelling data for this, I personally take this, but I take it twice a day. So I do 5 grams in the morning, 5 grams in the evening. There's some evidence that if you do a bigger load up front, that perhaps you lose more through the kidneys and it is excreted into the urine. There's also, unfortunately, sort of circulating misinformation that creatine is harmful for the kidneys. And that is not true. I think that comes from just the way that the labs are measured, because creatinine, which is a breakdown of creatine, is part of our standard basic metabolic panel. So if that number goes up because you're supplementing creatine, that's all it means is you're excreting it. Doesn't mean that your kidneys are harmed. In fact, probably healthier because you're giving more ATP to the kidneys. But anyway, so that's one. You mentioned the omega-6 to 3 ratio. So I think omega-3s, most Americans are deficient omega-3s. So if we are not able to get an adequate actual dose of fish or natural fish oil, taking a high quality supplement is absolutely one that I think can be very helpful. in terms of brain health and cognitive performance and long-term health, cardiovascular health. Vitamin D would be another. And there are even some studies that have looked at fish oil along with vitamin D being massively impactful. And again, this perhaps gets back to your sun exposure, Eric. I mean, we do manufacture vitamin D in the skin with 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure a day. Most people still probably don't get enough sun exposure for that to be adequate, and we want to have those levels optimized. And vitamin D's it's very interesting. I mean, I learned in medical school that it was good for your bones and your teeth, and that was kind of where it stopped. But we now know that it's a steroid hormone and it impacts a precursor for testosterone, and I mean it impacts multiple cellular pathways due to its action in the nucleus, which is a little ball of DNA in the cells, and how that impacts expression of proteins and keeping our cells healthy. So vitamin D is another big one. Let's see here. Number 4. So turmeric. That one kind of surprised me when I learned about it for the first time, or curcumin. That's a very potent anti-inflammatory that actually does have a meaningful decrease in all-cause mortality, so it would appear. And then 5th, probably a decent B complex. I mean, we want to keep B12 in check, but well, actually, well, let's keep B vitamins, but magnesium. Sorry, I skipped over that one. That's probably even more basic than B vitamins, because most folks, I think, are deficient magnesium to one degree or another. Back to that circadian rhythm and sleep, magnesium can be helpful at nighttime to help with sleep onset. Again, doses weight-based, so for women on average 300-ish milligrams, for men 400-ish milligrams plus or minus. But magnesium is also a cofactor for over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. And so it's sort of tough to tell whether you're deficient or not, because you get a blood level drawn, and our blood levels are very tightly regulated, but the main storage is in the bones. So we don't go bone biopsying people to check out their magnesium stores for obvious reasons. It's painful and not very efficient. So another easy over-the-counter supplement to take. So those are probably my top 5 that I think most people could probably benefit from. And to be clear, I'm sure you all cover this here, but supplements are not FDA regulated. So you want to make sure that whatever you are ingesting is third-party tested, and to make sure that you verify that, because there's a lot of snake oil out there, in my opinion. So just be sure that you know what you're getting.
Yeah, we've talked before about the fact that when supplements are studied and they do third-party testing, they're found to have somewhere between 0 and 500% of what's on the label. So we're big
Yes.
fans of third-party tested supplements for that reason. So totally
Indeed.
agree. Um, Donovan, looks like you have a question?
Just a minor question. You mentioned B12.
Hmm.
Excuse me. Was that should be a part of the B complex, or that it shouldn't?
Yeah, you can take B12 alone as a supplement. For that matter, I think a good natural source for a lot of people, and I tend to put the following on my salad when I eat kind of my first meal of the day. But like nutritional yeast is a good natural source. It has a lot of B complex or B vitamins in it. But if you just take a pill, or a multivitamin, I mean, well, yeah, either multivitamin or B complex dedicated vitamin, both can be helpful. Yeah, B12 is one that we want in an ideal range. Too low, and believe it or not, can even mimic dementia. I mean, I've seen, goodness, countless patients that show up with a nutritional deficiency and their B12 is through the floor. And you load them up with B vitamins, and they turn around in a period of months, which is pretty cool, as a reversible cause of dementia. But thiamine, same thing. I mean, especially in people that are heavy alcohol users, that alcohol blocks the absorption of thiamine or vitamin B1. So there's a whole list, but B vitamins are cofactors for methylation and for again enzymatic reactions in the neurons or the brain cells. So again, should be optimized. Typically, you want all in an optimal range to function well. Great question, Donovan.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Randy asked another question that kind of gets in the direction of pharmaceutical agents, and he said, "Are there any pharmaceutical agents, drugs that are commonly used but cause you pause and hesitation because they're not as neurologically friendly?"
Boy, a bunch. There are a lot that are regularly used. Randy, are you thinking of any in particular? I mean,
Well,
Well,
I'm
just like,
guessing you're not a fan of anticholinergics, for example, if you can avoid that. But
yes, sure. Get a
yeah,
lot of consults for confusion.
I'm more and more there's the standard of care in medicine is that we don't dose statins anymore based on cholesterol levels. We dose statins based on risk factors. So it's not uncommon that many clients come with high dose statins. And I see it different. I think that we can control metabolic disease using your brain coat protocol approach rather than just a pharmaceutical agent. So I don't know that I have an adverse relationship with statins. I have an adverse relationship with the general paradigm that everyone needs them based on risk factors. And obviously, there's a whole bunch of other medicines. PPIs oftentimes are used based on protocol, especially from a hospitalist perspective. Everyone starts a PPI when they go inpatient. Oftentimes, they're not reduced. So, could you take just a minute and talk about commonly used medicines that seem to be innocuous, but perhaps they're not always?
Statins are a great place to start. And I agree with you, Randy, that we should be, again, thinking about how do we optimize our lifestyle as naturally as possible, again, to mimic our biology before we throw a drug at something. And the way that I look at pharmacology and medicine is that there are no solutions, there are just trade-offs. And there's always a risk benefit equation between, when we modify a pathway and, say somebody has, I don't know, some sort of familial hypercholesterolemia, which is an inherited genetic disorder that runs in families where the cholesterol is very high. Given the risk benefit ratio of a very aggressive lipid lowering or cholesterol lowering medication regimen, might that prevent somebody from dying prematurely of a heart attack or having a disabling stroke? Yeah, sure. So in that person, perhaps an intensive lipid lowering regimen with statins or PCSK9 inhibitors and so forth, could that be helpful? Probably. Do I think everybody needs to be on a statin? No, surely no. We see rhabdomyolysis or muscle breakdown, or even just muscle soreness or cramps. We see impacts in the liver, so elevated liver enzymes where there's inflammation in the liver, because that's where the statins actually work on an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase. So I think we have to think critically about, what's the risk benefit ratio? How does it apply to an individual? And what are the goals? And what are the opportunity costs of utilizing a certain medicine or another? At least that's how I try to think about it, versus just creating a blanket protocol, to your point, Randy, where everyone's on a proton pump inhibitor and that could potentially have adverse effects for different people. Um, Aspirin's another one. I think the literature's caught up to this some. At least my latest read on the data is that not everybody over the age of 50 should be on aspirin, which I agree with. I don't think we should just be handing that out. But if somebody again has had coronary stents or so stents in the arteries and the arteries of the heart because they've had narrowing or a blockage or a heart attack. If I've seen them for even a small stroke, we know that meaningfully reduces the future risk of a recurrent stroke because of the antiplatelet effect, or stopping those little platelets from gunking up the vessels and causing another heart attack or stroke. For the right person, yeah, that's beneficial. But again, we know that they
Thank
put.
you.
Sure, yeah, I guess I keep going, but we're of the same mindset there.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that sort of risk benefit analysis. I think that's true in a lot of different contexts. Rhett, who is a nationally recognized dementia expert, he speaks all over the country. We're blessed that he's part of our community here.
Yes.
He asks a great question that's, as he points out, it's a little bit more about behavioral psychology than neurology, but what are the key factors for motivating people to apply the brain mnemonic that you've talked about today?
Thank you, Rhett. Thanks for weighing in. So I try to approach this from, I guess, two directions. And one is, again, something I don't hear people talk about as much when we look at, like I said, functional medicine or root cause analysis. I think people do a great job of laying the science out. Here are the things that you've got to do. But without maybe taking it a step further, people have resistance to different interventions for their own reasons. And just like as we were just talking about with medications being a risk benefit discussion, or at least tailoring this to an individual, when we look at the lifestyle pillars of the brain protocol, rather than telling people you've got to hammer through these in order, BRAIN, or you've got to do them all at once. Certainly, we know that's a recipe for failure. What I encourage my Transcend Health members to do And we have a free Facebook training on this too, by the way. I can get you the link, Eric, but it's just a free video series that walks people through this. If anybody's interested, it's 100% free. But I tell everybody to focus on the easiest letter possible, and ideally a letter that you're already doing or you already feel like you have some control over. And the reason I say that is that I'm a big fan of building on momentum and habit stacking. Because let's take rest or sleep as a letter, just for example. But if you already feel like your sleep is okay, or you feel relatively well rested, excuse me, but say you start to build in, morning light, or you're pushing away from screens in the evening, and you're moving your meals a little earlier, and you've got a nice wind down routine, whatever that means, and over a period of a week or two, your sleep is that much better. Which, by the way, we haven't talked about wearable devices, but I wear an Oura ring. I don't have a direct relationship with them for whatever reason, but it could be an Apple Watch, Whoop, Fitbit, any of the trackers. But you can get a pretty decent rudimentary sleep study with a basic wearable device and get feedback from your own lifestyle. If you eat dinner earlier or skip the alcohol or whatever whatever the intervention is. And as you start to improve and those parameters improve, and you can actually measure this with data, then you wake up feeling more rested and you have more energy and you're more focused. And then it's easy to tackle the next letter. And maybe if you're already going for a morning walk, you can increase the length of the walk. Or if you're already doing your exercise snacks, maybe with breakfast, you do it with lunch. And so I try to encourage people to build and create this momentum and stack the habits. And I find pretty quickly that once people start that feedback process and they actually start to feel better, they're even more motivated to continue. And that's sort of that process. And Eric would know this, having just read The Incredible Brain, but chapter one has nothing to do with how your brain or body works or any of these interventions or the brain protocol. But it actually is find your why. That's the title of the chapter. And I encourage all of you to really spend time and get clear on what your goals are in life. And I know we touched on that at the beginning of the call, but again, I think the reason that we all do things like this is because we want to be able to continue to show up for what we care about and what matters. And having a long-term vision of what that looks like and where we're going to end up in 10, 20, 30 years or more. Once you know the vision, the goal, the target, the direction, it becomes very easy to then reverse engineer that plan to get you there. And you can set up simple decision filters such as, well, if I don't know, just use an easy example, but when the dessert menu comes out at a restaurant and you go, is the chocolate cake going to get me closer to my fitness goals or not? You've got an easy decision filter when you got the why in place. Not to say you can't enjoy your chocolate cake, because dessert's one of my personal struggles. So I'm in this with you guys, I assure you. But it becomes easier to adhere to the goals. And again, it's progress over perfection, but I think you'll get the idea. So Rhett, I don't know if that answered it, but I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like if you're talking about habit stacking, that you're also a fan of Charles Duhigg and James Clear and
Yes.
Power of Habit and Atomic Habits. Those are great books if people are looking to understand habits at a deeper level. But Randy says that conventional medicine differentiates between Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia and multiple sclerosis, and the list goes on. And they're viewed as very different, unique states with different treatments or approaches. And Randy wants to know, does your brain protocol approach shift or pivot depending on the type of neurodegenerative disease that you see in one of your patients?
That's a good question, Randy. So I look at Parkinson's and certainly Lewy body dementia. Those are obviously on the same spectrum, depending on what shows up first. But then Alzheimer's, and even maybe frontotemporal dementia, that kind of thing. All is neurodegenerative. And I suppose my approach here is more on the preventive side, meaning my hope with the brain protocol and talking to people who are maybe minimally symptomatic or even pre-symptomatic to avoid these conditions later in life. And when we look at the impact that this has on lowering neuroinflammation or inflammation in the brain, by controlling our blood pressure, keeping cholesterol in a healthy range, keeping blood glucose in a healthy range, all the different, again, positive changes in the body that happen with exercise and so forth, we know that these offer a meaningful, statistically significant risk reduction in any of the neurodegenerative conditions. So again, this is my read on the literature is once we're kind of down that pathway and that process has started, or at least by the time the first symptom shows up, we know there's been a period of years, if not, decades, that these pathologic changes have accumulated in the brain. And at least as of today, that's harder to reverse than it is to prevent, if that makes sense. So that's the neurodegenerative camp. Multiple sclerosis is interesting. There's an interesting paper earlier this year that was published on this about the relationship between the gut microbiome and MS, which is we haven't talked about gut-brain health, but I'm a big believer in that. But of particular pathologic strains that seem to possibly trigger MS in people, which I think is fascinating. But in either case, MS is an inflammatory condition, or it's due to the immune system overactivating and chewing on the wires of the brain and the spinal cord. So again, back to what lowers inflammation. And we know that an aggressive exercise protocol and the right nutritional plan and avoiding obesity, avoiding smoking, again, seems to be a correlation with vitamin D levels as well. So back to maintaining an optimal vitamin D level, supplementing the myelin sheath with omega-3 fatty acids. I mean, I guess all of these different pillars are just sort of a baseline level of protection against a lot of these conditions. But admittedly, there are some polygenic risk factors associated with each condition. So meaning there's some complex genetic interplay that might apply more to one person than another. And so it's a complex answer, but I guess the blanket statement, Randy, is that I aim more towards prevention than trying to catch up once someone's there, or at least to help stabilize or reduce progression if I can. Does that help?
It does, yes, thank you. How about the same question with seizure disorders? Is there seizure disorders often show up way earlier than these other neurodegenerative diseases, or they're present from birth, right? Childhood epilepsy. So does your brain approach shift or pivot with seizures?
That's a great question too. So that would be more case by case, because there is such a wide array of causes of seizures. As you mentioned, there's some genetic seizure disorders that happen perinatally or at least prenatally, that somebody's born with. Whereas there's acquired epilepsy where people later in life end up with traumatic brain injuries or strokes or tumors or structural reasons that the brain is more prone to seizing, and everything in between. So I would say it's case by case, and meaning there's some kind of classic pediatric seizure disorders that respond well to a ketogenic diet, right? Or even a certain type of cannabinoid. So I get this question a lot about CBD oil being helpful for pediatric seizures or epilepsy. And there's, I think, a famous strain that was out of Colorado, like Charlotte's Web, I think, is what it was called, before this was, really FDA approved or studied. But cannabidiol is an FDA approved anti-epileptic, right, that we use in children. I'm an adult neurologist, so I'm quickly outside my scope here with pediatric epilepsy, but we do treat a lot of adult seizures. But no, I mean, it would be the same general paradigm of trying to make sure somebody's sleeping well, because we know a lack of sleep is very epileptogenic or makes people seize more. We know that certain dietary patterns, again, can be disruptive. And this is one area where again, medication is a gold standard and can absolutely help improve quality of life for somebody who suffers from epilepsy. And again, depending on the type of epilepsy, sometimes people can come off their medication after a period of time. Again, that's nuanced, but so great question. But that's a pretty detailed answer depending on the type and why.
Earlier, maybe just within a couple of years, some neurologists have released books about Parkinson's and toxicity. Can you give us an elevator statement about how toxicity impacts neurological health, and maybe how that doesn't readily show up in your brain protocol, but how do you approach that when you're coaching or you're talking about toxicity generally?
Absolutely. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with Michael Oken's work out of University of Florida, but he's a great name in this space for anyone that's interested. But yes, so Parkinson's, again, there's some rare genetic associations, but those seem to be complex. But toxins, to your point, Randy, do appear to be causative. And in particular, there are a handful. So pesticides seem to be a big one. There's actually a large paper about 3 months ago that was in it was JAMA or the New England Journal. I'm blanking on the source, so apologies for that. But it looked at proximity to golf courses and incidence of Parkinson's. And you think golf course, how in the world is that relevant? Well, it's the degree of pesticides that are treated on a golf course that then make it into groundwater, that make it into drinking water. And there seemed to be, again, a pretty linear relationship between how close somebody lived to a golf course and the incidence of developing Parkinson's. I'm a former Navy neurologist, and my last duty station was Camp Lejeune. And if any of you have seen the commercials about Camp Lejeune, I didn't. These came out while I was on base. I thought they were local to like our area in rural Eastern North Carolina. I'm getting phone calls from my uncles in California going, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" But all joking aside, I had a handful of retired patients who had developed Parkinson's or different types of cancers or malignancies that were stationed at Camp Lejeune when we knew there was a runoff of organophosphates and toxins that were in the drinking water. And it's horrible. And I mean, it took decades for these changes to manifest and show up. But absolutely. Trichloroethylene, I think, is another big one, kind of an organic solvent that's used in cleaning machinery. So they're a handful. But again, without raising everyone's anxiety about, oh my gosh, I'm a golfer or I live, the way around this, in my opinion, is to be very mindful of what we are putting in our bodies. If you'll ever talk about a reverse osmosis water filtration system, I'm a big fan of one of these. You can actually get a tabletop unit that's portable. You can bring with you for probably $300 or $400 on Amazon. That you just replace the filters every few months, and they do come in kind of an elaborate version that's a home installation under a sink or a countertop. That's more expensive, but perhaps more robust, and have to change the filters less often. But being mindful of our drinking water is maybe the biggest way to get around this. And
Did the VA, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm curious because you were there, so this is firsthand experience to you. How did the VA address that? Because that's now reactive. We're looking back that the exposure has occurred. So was there an intervention for these clients to either test them and identify, did they have some of these high degrees of organophosphates in their body? And number two, what did they do about that? Or did they offer some sort of regimen for treatment for those veterans?
So the exposure was it was a pretty broad range, and from memory, I want to say it was mid to late 60s through early 80s. So it's kind of Vietnam era, then plus some on either side of that. And again, being that I was there from 2018 to 2022, I was seeing people, really decades after they were stationed there, even if they still lived in a surrounding area or retired off base. So there was no, to my knowledge, there was no testing through the VA that was looking at an active level of toxin in the body. I mean, this is my personal little anecdotal experience here, so just bear with me. But I was not happy with the way the VA handled most of my patients because they were denying claims when clearly people had been there, and it was really just on the order of financial compensation. And then relevant medical treatment. And of course, they're paying for doctor's visits or surgeries or things like this. But again, as I mentioned a minute ago, Randy, with your other comment, once we're down that neurodegenerative pathway, very, very tough to reverse course in today's world. And so we're really with Parkinson's, there's really no known disease modifying therapy. It's really just symptomatic treatment at this point. And then for cancer, that just depends on how early did we catch it, what is it, and then what are the treatment protocols. But that's a highly variable answer as well.
Perfect. Thank you for elaborating. Any some of the dementia drugs like memantine and their mechanism action or donepezil, right? They're designed to try to increase certain neurotransmitters. Do you ever recommend acetylcholine or some of the choline OTC supplements for people with dementia? Do you have any strong opinions about that?
In my experience, Namenda, donepezil aren't terribly effective. And when we look at the clinical trial data, it really the improvement is more from the caregiver perspective rather than the patient perspective, meaning that it's easier on caregivers, which is kind of a backwards way of doing things, in my opinion. So I tend not to gravitate towards those. It's just my personal opinion and my experience. I'd be curious if you'll have a different experience. But Yeah, that's kind of my blanket statement, I guess. I'm not, not as big a
Yeah,
fan.
it answers my question.
Yeah.
One last one, because I tend to dominate. I don't want to dominate all the questions, but I don't every day get the chance to have a neurologist join our community and visit with us. So I guess I'm taking advantage of the fact that you're here. Maybe my last question on lifestyle from an intake perspective. We live in a very permissive society that has sung the common refrain of moderation in all things, and we've given alcohol a pass for many years. And I spend a lot of time with very concrete recommendations that alcohol should not have a pass, that even a little bit of a toxin is still a toxin, and that anyone who wants to be wholeheartedly preventive or even try to be reactive when there is an active disease process should leave alcohol behind. Do you have a strong opinion? Are you more permissive? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, sure do, Randy. Thank you for bringing that up as well. So my read on the literature, and most notably, this is from the UK Biobank data that has been quite helpful. So this is a cohort of, I mean, this has looked at goodness hundreds of thousands.
500,000. Yeah.
There you go. People and looked at postmortem autopsies and comparing controls, so people that have not had ever ingested alcohol to people that consume 1 to 2 units, and this is up to 1 to 2 units per week, by the way. And they define a unit as not a traditional drink that we define here in America, but as half a pint or half a drink, right? Now, a pint's 16 ounces, so maybe that's more than a 12-ounce American beer, but you get the idea. It's a smaller dose. And people that have 1 to 2 units have a substantially increased risk of neurodegenerative disease, so i.e., Alzheimer's or alcohol-related dementia, not to mention a host of cardiovascular disease and poor outcomes. So in general, cancer, yeah, correct. Cancer, you got it, high blood pressure, and so on. So I think we have the most clear medical evidence that we've ever had that any alcohol is bad, and that seems to be dose dependent. So more alcohol would be worse. That's in sort of in theory, or at least what we know, based on the literature. In reality, we to your point, Randy, we do live in a permissive society, in a society that's very social, and alcohol is a part of culture and a part of reality for many people, socially or otherwise. So it's a personal choice, but I think it should be an informed choice. And yes, I mean, if we are trying to optimize every risk factor in the book, I don't see how alcohol has a role in being helpful in that regard. And one thing that I've actually been pleased to see, and something that I've even personally taken advantage of, is the non-alcoholic beverage market that has come about. I don't know if anyone's tried Heineken Zero, for example, but as someone who has enjoyed a regular glass of Heineken beer and have been to the factory in Amsterdam and the whole thing, Heineken Zero is pretty darn close. It's hard to tell.
Awesome.
And there's even, they're non-alcoholic tequilas, and ALMAVE is one. Lewis Hamilton, who's a Formula One driver, if anybody knows who Lewis Hamilton is, has kind of been an investor in this. And I'm not that I'm a huge tequila fan, but that drink is pretty good. It has no alcohol. It's based on an agave plant. So anyway, there are ways to be social and to kind of do the I'm holding a drink thing or a mocktail without the potential harm. But yes, Randy, I don't think alcohol has a positive role in the body by any means.
Yeah, this is just a dumb anecdote, but it's kind of fun that many years ago there was a ketogenic beer company that came to me and a business partner and asked if we wanted to be investors in their ketogenic beer, because we talked a lot about the neuroprotective benefits of a ketogenic diet and would talk against the neurodestructive benefits of alcohol. So they thought we were perfect medical practitioners to invest in their keto beer. Needless to say, I opted out of the option, but I thought it was a very savvy business approach. So have you had any experience with that or heard anything about that?
I have not, but that is quite the idea. That's unique.
Yeah.
Keto beer, love it.
It is unique.
But
Well, this is
Randy, in the past when doctors were selling cigarettes, it was quite profitable. Are you sure you made the right decision there?
I know, right?
Yeah,
The
sure.
approach was to make an alcohol that had beta hydroxybutyrate in it, right? And so that would be an active ingredient instead of drinking like the ketone drinks that you can buy on Amazon or network marketing companies that they would make a ketogenic beer. And I have no idea where that's at now, if those are still on the market. There was a period of time you could buy them.
Interesting.
And Matt, to your point, 9 out of 10 doctors used to prefer camels, but they're all dead now. So that marketing kind of failed.
Yeah, indeed.
I think one thing that's been really helpful in terms of alcohol is how many young athletes have completely stopped drinking now.
Yeah.
Lots, and when I was young, everybody drank, and you were kind of a geek if you or a nerd if you didn't. There was all this social pressure to drink, and now I see lots of young people that were clearly smarter than I was when I was young, and they're in their young 20s. They're like, nope, we're done drinking. We've seen the math, and yeah, and they, especially, I think athletes kind of led this charge because they experienced improved performance when they just abstained.
Mhm.
Encouraging.
Matt,
Well,
one thing that, sorry, if I kind of jump in for one more, Eric, I know we're
go ahead. Yeah.
a little over on time. One thing that again that shocked me that really changed my habit was again getting one of these things. Like I said, I mean, if I even had one, I'm talking one beer, glass of wine with dinner, my heart rate variability would shrink, which is we can talk about what that means if we have time. But my resting heart rate increased, and my sleep was very poor. I mean, not only did I not feel as well the next day, to your point, I'm not an athlete. I go to the gym most days, but I'm not getting paid, right, to perform. But game changer in terms of how I feel and how I sleep, and I have data to back that up, which was striking to me at the time.
Yeah. Not only that, but you got Dr. Matthew Walker's great work at UC Berkeley saying that even one glass of wine can prevent a lot of people from getting into REM sleep. So if your sleep architecture is directly disrupted, then the clean cycle is not working, and you're going to have a buildup of waste and misfolded proteins and so forth. So part of the connection that I see here with your book, The Incredible Brain, is that your why matters. And Matt, you were just talking about these young athletes where their why clearly is, I want to be an amazing athlete. I want to perform at the highest level. And that why was enough for them to get over the hurdle of any sort of social awkwardness and saying, I just don't drink. It doesn't contribute to what I want most in terms of outcomes in my life. So we've kind of come full circle back to chapter 1 of The Incredible Brain. There's one last question. I know we're over time. Like Randy said, it's not every day we get to have a board certified neurologist answering questions here. So if anybody has to jump off, we get it. But let's kind of get us out on this question. And any last statement that you want to leave us with to remember, Dr. Williamson. And I'll preface by saying thank you so much for taking time to be here. We're grateful that you would take time out of your busy schedule to share some of the insights that are in your book. Having read the book, I loved it. I thought it was very well expressed. Certainly helped me develop an even better appreciation for the amazing organ that the brain is. You take a lot of time early in the book to just talk about the wonders of the brain, and I was nerding out over that. So can't say enough about that. But Donovan asked a great question, kind of sparked by the sunlight discussion. He says, well, what are your thoughts about red light? And I know there's over 6,000 studies on red and near infrared light. So what's your opinion about using that? And then if you could wrap up with just any quick summary of the thought that you want most to leave us with as we wrap up today.
Absolutely. Donovan, thank you. That's a great question. So again, my familiarity with the data on red light are for retinal or eye health. So there's some good papers that show improvement in age-related macular degeneration. And at a high level, back to the mitochondria, as Eric was mentioning earlier, being healthy and that we lose with age, near red light or infrared light can actually help improve mitochondrial populations in the retina, which helps reduce the incidence of the retinal nerve fiber layer cell loss. So meaning we improve vision that way or maintain it. So that's one way. With respect to skin, again, also some interesting, maybe less quality data, but I think is there in terms of boosting collagen production for dermal thickness, for helping skin maintain its more youthful appearance. Even seen some results with treating acne, so for killing certain strains of microbes for younger people, and then maybe not standing in front of a wall, and then this gets into like the whole dose and intensity kind of argument, but they make devices like tubes or bags you can insert yourself in as long as there's direct exposure to the skin. But by increasing that mitochondrial activity and ATP production, this does burn glucose. And so there actually been some interesting studies looking at glucose management with red light exposure on and off, maybe not just the face or the neck for more of a cosmetic appearance, but for whole body exposure and that helping with metabolic health, which I find interesting. And again, the following is a bit of an extrapolation, but when we think about, again, the long-term glucose management and maintaining steady blood glucose levels, and back to that opening comment that 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, as we're trying to optimize all those parameters, I think red light can be another nice addition. Also under the category of hormetic stressors, guess I left that one out, that can be helpful. There's actually a psychiatrist named Cody Rall, C-O-D-Y. Rall is R-A-L-L. He's a former Navy colleague of mine, and he has become like the kind of red light and neurofeedback guy. He's got a really neat YouTube channel, but he's actually investigating some red light products that shine red light intranasally, so through the nose and through the cribriform plate, which is where our first cranial nerve exits, our olfactory nerve, which is what we use to help smell and taste. And he actually there have been some studies that have shown that actually red light can penetrate the skull in this regard and actually hit the basal forebrain, so the frontal lobes of the brain. And they're looking at the application to potentially improvements in mood, improvements in neurodegenerative disease. And I initially was very skeptical of this approach because I've seen kind of these skull caps that, the red light only penetrates a few millimeters, and to get through hair and skin and muscle and bone and the meninges, which is the covering around the brain, that's a big ask. But to go through the nose, it actually appears thin enough that it actually does penetrate. So he's done some neat work on that. He'd be a guy to look up, and Eric, be happy to connect you, and he might be a good candidate to have just come on and talk about that if you guys are looking for someone else. He's a neat guy. So anyway, optimistic, some good data and potentially some emerging data for brain-specific applications. Donovan.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
was my brother was telling me about it. He has some cool light of that nature. He uses it, and I was just debating, should I try to make one of those happen for me or not? But it sounds like there's definitely some good potential there.
I think so. Yeah, it seems like a very promising field, which I'm interested to see where it goes. And so,
Maybe,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to add to this conversation that Eric and I purchased a red light helmet back in 2019 that we used in our clinic. It came from Thor Photobiomedicine. They were based out of the UK. And we also had a red light bed in our office. And I can tell you anecdotally that those were amongst some of the favorite treatments that people would do. They would express a noted benefit of calm, of relaxation. They oftentimes would say when getting out of the red light bed, they'd say, "Oh, my least favorite part of the day is when the light turns off." And this was a common refrain that we heard in our office. So this is not necessarily a scientific declaration about red light therapy, but we clearly know that there is benefit to red light from, I've read many of these studies, done extensive research that it can change CRP levels and lower tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6, interleukin 1B, interleukin 10. It changes these markers actually in the body, and it can modulate or change also, like Dr. Williamson said, metabolism, right? Shifts it in more of an anti-oxidative standpoint. So the way that I often will approach this topic with our clients is I'll let them know, hey, if we go back to Dr. Williamson's why, define your why, clarify your why. There are individuals who have the financial resources, may have exquisite risk, or they have early stages of some of these neurodegenerative diseases, and they are willing to put forth the resources to try to calm or to slow. Now, I would never say, Donovan, do red light therapy over changing your diet, optimizing your sleep, and cleaning up your lifestyle, right? That always should take precedence. But it's not uncommon that people join our service and they've already done all that. They have found the data out there that stuff is important, and they've adopted it, and they come to the table and say, what could I add to this habit stacking that Dr. Williamson talked about, that tips the scale in my favor. And I think that's where some of these photobiomodulatory interventions have some value. So that's just anecdotal personal experience for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. And I would add that when we were looking at that light helmet from Thor Photo Medicine, the initial studies on that done at the Boston VA with blast concussion patients from the Gulf War showed them improving across measures by an average of 2 standard deviations. I mean, it was significant. And they did cadaver studies showing that about 3% of the photons actually made it through the skull, which was interesting. But there, I mean, it had 1,000 diodes in it. It's not like a capitalist, like you're not growing hair with that thing. It's different. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I think overall, anything that improves mitochondrial functioning is likely to be helpful. And it's significant that Harvard Med School has an entire department of photomedicine. It's there for a reason. Light is something that we're really trying to understand better in general in medicine, and there are specialists that are digging into that. So it'll be fun to see how the story continues to unfold over time.
No question. And if I may, so I can support Randy and Eric's anecdotal observation here about the relaxation. I do have a red light bag that admittedly haven't been using lately as much as I should. But when I have regularly used it, I feel that same level of relaxation. And often combine that with mindfulness or meditation. And man, that is again, I've not, other than my, my HRV heart rate, my kind of just physiologic stress data, if you will. I've not checked blood markers before or after, but it is a notable improvement in terms of relaxation. So I can absolutely second that, again, from just a personal anecdotal experience. And if is it a good time to kind of leave with the blanket or summary statement?
Yep, we've gone way over, but it's been super fun and interesting, and we're grateful for your time. So yeah, if you can give us like the 1 minute summation here, then we'll get everybody home to other things.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you all for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if I could leave everybody with one thing, it's just the reminder that you are in control. And I know, I mean, life happens, and we all experience just a variety of events. Let's just say that. But you are in control of your outcomes, and I would highly, highly encourage you all to get clear on your why and on your purpose. And again, once you have that, just remember it's easy. It's easy to put these pieces in place, and whether or not you feel it every day, even the most minor lifestyle adjustments can pay dividends for your future. And as a former, I guess, Navy man, I kind of like the idea of a ship sailing across the ocean. And if you imagine we just have a 1 degree course correction up front, that doesn't seem like much, but at the end of the journey, we can end up in a very different place with just a minor adjustment. So with that, again, thank you all, and it's been a pleasure.
Dr.
Thank you
Williamson,
so
you're
much.
awesome. Thanks for your help.
That's a great reminder. Where can people go to find the incredible brain? What's the best, quickest source for them to access that if they want to?
Amazon. That's the easiest place.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, Matt has sort of open office hours now. If you got questions, if you want to talk a little bit more, or you want to dig into anything in your specific case, Matt will be there. The link is both on the membership site and in the chat here. And with that, thank you so much for joining us for another masterclass. Again, thank you, Dr. Williamson, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Not too spooky of a day, but enjoy the rest of this Halloween day.
Thank
Take
you.
care, guys.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.